What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to College Football Talk with Peter Burtonette, bringing you a special signing day edition of the show. Going to be breaking down kind of progress reports for a couple of teams, some main teams who maybe made a little bit of headlines with either some flips or being able to establish themselves at the top of the team recruiting rankings. But if you go on to enjoy this video, please feel free to leave a like, consider subscribing to the channel, and turn on those post notifications so you're always up to date whenever I post. But without further ado, let's dive into it. And this is kind of a random order. This is just the order that I came up with as I was getting into this. I'm going to start out with a team that I'm giving a C- rating to, and that is the Florida State Seminoles. And I think they still have a phenomenal class. They still have a very good class. Florida State, they signed the number 10 recruiting class in the country, but it could have been a lot higher because they had two big losses today. First of all, they lose 5-star safety KJ Bolden, signed with Georgia, and then 4-star defensive end, and this guy made a little bit of headlines, Armando Blount. He signed originally, I think, with Miami, and then Florida State flipped him. And then the same day, earlier today, on Wednesday, if you're watching this later in the week, flipped back to the Hurricanes. And so, first of all, that's a big pickup for the Hurricanes, a 4-star defensive end. Before the Florida State Seminoles losing their top two recruits, or two of their top recruits, are certainly heavy losses for the Seminoles. They're still, barring any sort of, late change-ups or late commitments, they're still going to be a top 10. There's going to be a top 10 class, but I think the way that their signing day went, I would give them probably a C-. And then a couple of other schools that I'm going to go over a couple of schools that I think did a really good job today, but a couple of others that I think struggled losing some commitments were Florida. They lost 4 ESPN top 300 recruits. Those are all heavy losses for this Florida Gators recruiting class. And then Texas A&M has taken a real deep dive, and obviously part of this is the hiring of Mike Elko, losing Jimbo Fisher as head coach. But just 2 years ago, the Aggies had the number 1 class in the country, and now they're down, I think, outside the top 20 or right around number 20. And so a big drop off for the Aggies. And then a couple of other schools. And I know the first team that I mentioned here does a really good job, a phenomenal job of developing. And I think the recruiting class at this moment might not be the most important thing, but the Michigan Wolverines, they rank number 19 in the country, and they're joined by USC right behind them at number 20. These are two perennial powerhouse programs that are well behind schools like Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, even Miami and Oregon, teams that I'll go over here in a little bit. They're all well behind those teams, and they're behind even some, upstart type teams. I'm going to slide over here to take a look at this, and hopefully the focus kind of shifts over. But you're looking at these classes, they're behind, again, perennial programs like a Notre Dame, but they're even also behind an Auburn and a Tennessee and a Penn State and South Carolina, Ole Miss, all teams that are kind of competitors for getting some of these recruits, especially for Michigan, looking at a school like Penn State ahead of them, obviously Ohio State, that hasn't mattered on the field, but when you're looking at this sort of thing, you're looking at the prospects for a team moving forward. And so for these Wolverines and the Trojans, I think it's something, I don't think it's anything to be overly concerned about, but I think both programs sitting right on the edge of the top 20 certainly have to kind of keep an eye and make sure that they're still getting players in. I think for Michigan, it matters a little bit less because, first of all, they're a team that made the college football playoff this year. They've made it the last 3 years in a row, and they've won the Big Ten the last 3 years in a row. And I think the way that Michigan is building right now, they do a phenomenal job, better than maybe anybody else in the country, at really developing some of those, underlooked guys that are underlooked, overlooked. I feel like they both work because they're either not looked at enough or they're overlooked when people are looking for recruits to sign, just because maybe they don't have the 5 or the 4 stars. And I think Michigan does a really good job. So I think there isn't too much cause for concern for Michigan. I think for USC, maybe a little bit. But those are my thoughts on kind of the teams that are maybe underwhelming on National Signing Day. But then taking a look at some of the teams that impressed, you have to start out with the team that tops these rankings, the Georgia Bulldogs. I'm giving them a grade of a B+. They lose quarterback Dylan Raiola, I think number 6 by 24/7, the recruiting rankings that I have up there to the side. But they gain Bolden from Florida State, the safety that I mentioned earlier. They also seal the top cornerback by ESPN, Ellis Robinson the fourth, and they seal the top linebacker by 24/7 Sports with Justin Williams. And so they establish another number 1 top-ranked composite class. And this is something that Alabama did year after year after year when they were building their dynasty. And I think it's perfectly understandable. Georgia is simply not going to win a national championship every year, but they've put themselves in a position where, at the very least, competing for one is simply the standard, and winning one is, reaching the standard or achieving the standard. So for the Georgia Bulldogs, being able to get the number 1 overall class again, more than likely again, barring any sort of late additions or subtractions, they hold that top position. They have guys that some will maybe be a couple years from plugging in. A good amount of these guys could find playing time next year and be able to make an impact. So a big class for Georgia. Before I get into kind of my top 2, I have it down to 2 teams that I think really won National Signing Day and have won recruiting so far this offseason, but a couple of others before I get into that. You've got Auburn at number 7. The results haven't always shown it on the field, but they played Alabama tough. I imagine maybe that gave them a bit of a boost for recruits that were at that game at Jordan-Hare, and they have the number 7 class in the country. And then Texas Tech. They are at number 24, so it might not seem like the biggest thing for the Red Raiders, but the last time that Texas Tech was in the top 25 was in 2011. They had a couple of classes that were just outside, I think inside the top 30 or top 35, but they haven't had a top 25 class in 13 years because this is the class of 2024. So a big class for Texas Tech. I imagine when getting in the offseason, right now I'm kind of looking at the overall rankings of these classes and diving into some specifics for some schools, but maybe something I'll take a look at more in the offseason when, the videos aren't as focused on the games that are happening on the field, but on recruiting and outlooks for the future, because the Red Raiders with the class coming in like this are certainly a team to keep an eye on. And then, of course, mentioned Dylan Raiola earlier. Can't go without mentioning Nebraska for having a big National Signing Day or early National Signing Day. And so a big class coming in for the Cornhuskers. I think, let me make sure I get this right where they're ranking at. Yeah, they're sitting actually right ahead of Texas Tech at number 23. Shout out Kentucky. They've been doing a really good job in recruiting, and they're right around kind of that 7, 8, 9 win total every year. They're at number 25 to round out that top 25. So those are a couple schools under the radar. And Missouri, fresh off of a good season, is at number 22, just behind the team that was all the rage last offseason, Colorado, with the number 21 class. But keep an eye on Colorado. They might be in the running for another top offensive lineman. I think Seton Jones could be leaning in that direction. So keep an eye out for that, though, because that could bump Colorado up and help fix really what was their biggest issue this year on the offensive line. But here we go. These are the teams that I think had the best day and really have 2 of the best classes in the country, deservedly so. Number 1 is the Miami Hurricanes. I mentioned them briefly already for being the double flip winners for the defensive end, Blount. But I think the only thing that keeps them out of being an A+ is that they're not going to be getting Jeremiah Smith, more than likely. I think if anything, if he doesn't end up committing to Ohio State, he signed his letter earlier today, but as of recording of this video at just before 8:30 Eastern, it hadn't been sent in yet. So I'll update that if that does get sent in. But obviously, I think he's from South Florida. I know he's from the state of Florida. So kind of, maybe a little bit of a miss for the Hurricanes, but I think it was kind of down maybe ultimately. Well, no, now that I mention it, I'm going to backtrack here a little bit. He had a Miami like bag or something like that, and he did actually say, I saw this before recording this video, he had 2 hats in his bag, and it was down to Miami and Ohio State. So if he does end up flipping, it would probably be the Hurricanes, and I think that would boost Miami to an A++ class. But I do have the Hurricanes with an A class. Offensively, even without Smith, they have a ton of really good guys coming in. Running back Kevin Riley, electric and dynamic tight end Elijah Lofton, wide receivers JoJo Trader, Nye Carr, and Chance Robinson. And then they have the 7th overall player in the class, defensive lineman Justin Scott coming in, 4-star athlete Zaquan Patterson, a 4-star edge Marquise Lightfoot, and a 4-star linebacker Adarius Hayes. And then the number 4 junior college offensive tackle, I think number 4 overall player, Markel Bell, coming in with this class. So the Miami Hurricanes, all of that to be said, they have the number 3 class in the country in the composite rankings. Let's just verify that before Okay, number 4, actually, they are behind Texas at the moment, but I think actually number 3 because maybe they're a little bit higher in like On3 or ESPN's rankings. So I believe they still have the number 3 overall class. So a big class coming in for the Hurricanes. Mario Cristobal has done a good job in terms of, maybe steering this team in the right direction, but it's a 7-5 season this year. They still have a bowl game to play in. We look at that loss to Georgia Tech, Cristobal seems to be doing a really good job recruiting, obviously helped by coaching in the state of Florida and in southern Florida, where there's a ton of talent in Miami, in the Miami area, southern Florida overall. But I think it is going to have to translate to results on the field. I think this is the year that the Hurricanes have to take that step forward, and it'll be interesting to see if maybe some of these guys that they're bringing into the class are able to do that. But finally, the team that I have getting an A+, and I think the one thing with this is a little bit shaped by transfers coming in, and that is the Oregon Ducks. The Ducks, I'm giving an A+ ranking. They have the number 5 composite class in the country. They flipped a couple of really good wide receivers, Ryan Pelham and Jeremiah McClellan, and obviously being able to potentially pair those guys with either Dylan Gabriel or from Oklahoma or Dante Moore from UCLA are obviously huge pickups. And I didn't notate everybody, but I'm going to take a quick look here at Oregon's class and give a couple of other key names. So for Dan Lanning, he has one of the top recruits in the country, actually 2 of the top recruits, number 16 nationally and number 17. You've got defensive linemen kind of bolstering the defensive line here, Aiden Breland and Elijah Rushing on the edge. Then linebacker Braden Pelt, also he's a high-level 4-star just outside the top 50 according to 24/7. And then offensive tackle Jaquan McCroy, cornerback Dakota Fields, safety Aaron Flowers, and then a couple of cornerbacks, other 4-star cornerbacks as well, Flowers and Laulea. I hope I say that right. So big class for the Oregon Ducks coming in for Dan Lanning, and I think it shows, his style is solidifying that defense, and that's what this class does as well, but also bringing in the 2 receivers that I already mentioned will be big for the Oregon class as well. So it's a big day in the college football world with the recruiting rankings, and obviously, got to credit a team like in Alabama for establishing themselves again with, I think, a 6th straight year with a top 3 class. And a couple of other teams, Texas is up there in the top 5 as well. So plenty of positives for lots of schools to go around. Some schools that still have some work to do, and schools that will continue to build through the transfer portal as well, which is something I'm sure I'll make a video on coming up here soon. But if you stuck around to this point in the video, thank you so much for taking the time to watch College Football Talk. I'm your host, Peter Burtnett, signing out. Peace.